The lake was quiet that morning, the kind of silence that only comes when the world has not yet realized a storm is brewing. I stood at the edge of my dock, the boards warm beneath my feet, the water glassy and calm. Birds wheeled overhead, the kind of scene that ought to have belonged to peace. But the air was not peaceful. It was charged. 3 figures stood at the top of the dock, their clipboards clutched like weapons, their expressions tight with self-importance. They did not ask questions. They gave orders. "You cannot be here," the tallest one snapped, her voice cutting through the morning air like a blade. "This dock does not belong to you. Vacate immediately." The absurdity of the statement almost made me laugh. I own this dock. It was written into the deed, stamped, signed, and paid for in full. Yet here they were, HOA officers who believed their authority stretched over land and water alike. Behind me, tied neatly to the dock, gleamed a boat, long, sleek, and almost painfully expensive. Its polished hull caught the morning sun. Its chrome railing glinted. But it was not mine. It belonged to one of them. It was their pride, their symbol of wealth, their floating throne. And as they stood there, threatening me with eviction, hurling fines and legal jargon like stones, I could not help but glance at that boat and think, by the end of this hour, that vessel will no longer be theirs. They thought they had cornered me. They thought the dock, the water, even the law bent to their will. But they had made a mistake so brazen, so arrogant, that it would cost them dearly. And when the storm broke, it was not me who lost ground. It was them, watching in disbelief as the very symbols of their power slipped away before their eyes. That morning began with threats, but it ended with their boat in my hands. When I bought the lakefront property, I was not searching for a fight. I was searching for peace. The world beyond the water had grown too loud, too crowded, too demanding. I wanted mornings where the first sound I heard was the call of loons echoing across the surface. Evenings where I could sit with a line in the water, waiting for the tug of a fish as the sky blazed orange. The lake was supposed to be my sanctuary, my escape from the relentless grind. And at first, the house was modest, but it came with something that mattered far more, a strip of shoreline and, extending from it, a dock that reached into the calm heart of the lake. That dock was mine, every board, every nail, every right guaranteed by the deed. I made it my own. I sanded down the splintered wood, sealed it against the elements, and placed a chair at its edge where I could sit for hours, legs dangling above the water, mind unburdened. Neighbors would pass by in kayaks, sometimes waving, sometimes paddling quickly as though afraid of lingering too long near my property. I thought little of it at first. Some people simply kept to themselves. It was not until weeks later that I began to understand. The whispers, the sideways glances, the tension that rippled beneath the surface, like a current no one wanted to acknowledge, because this was not just a lake. It was a kingdom, and the HOA was its crown. They controlled everything. The paint colors on houses, the height of fences, even the placement of trash cans. But here, on the water, their control became something deeper. They treated the lake as though it were their private estate, every dock and boat subject to their rule. I was the newcomer, the outsider, and worse, I was not one of them. At first, I ignored the warnings. A note slipped under my door. Dock construction must be pre-approved. A man muttering as he paddled past. That spot's not really yours. I shrugged them off, certain the law and the deed were on my side. But then the letters came. Official-looking envelopes with bold lettering. Demand that I remove unauthorized structures. Threats of fines for encroachment. Promises of legal action should I fail to comply. The absurdity made my blood boil. My dock was not unauthorized. It was not illegal. It was written into the property itself. Still, the letters piled up, each one more aggressive than the last. And then came the day when they did not send paper. They came in person. 3 figures on my dock, voices sharp, eyes hard, convinced they could order me off what was mine. And behind me, gleaming in the morning sun, sat the boat that would become their undoing. They thought they owned the water. But I knew something they did not. Something that would turn their arrogance against them in the most spectacular way. The calm lake was about to become a battlefield, and I was ready to fight. The first time they arrived in person, the morning sun had barely risen above the tree line. Mist drifted lazily across the lake, the kind of morning that should have been sacred, untouched. I was sitting on the edge of the dock with a fishing line in the water, the quiet broken only by the occasional splash of a trout. Then I heard footsteps, heavy, deliberate, the rhythm of people who did not come to share the morning, but to claim it. 3 of them approached, clipboards pressed against their chests as if the paper they carried were shields. Their expressions were the same, tight-lipped, unyielding, filled with the quiet arrogance of people used to being obeyed. "This dock," the tallest one said, gesturing sharply with her pen, "is not authorized. It must be removed immediately." I reeled in my line slowly, deliberately, and placed the rod down beside me. "This dock," I replied calmly, "is written into my deed. It was here before your board ever existed. It will remain." Her jaw tightened. The 2 flanking her shifted uncomfortably, but they did not back down. The HOA governs all lakefront properties. Structures must be approved. Yours was not. You are in violation. I almost laughed at the absurdity. Violation? For using my own dock? You have no jurisdiction here. The man beside her sneered, his voice thick with condescension. "People like you think the rules don't apply. But we have dealt with this before. If you do not comply, we will escalate." Their words were sharp, but their confidence was brittle. They were not used to resistance. They were used to people folding, to neighbors sighing and paying fines just to avoid the hassle. I leaned back slightly, my voice calm but firm. "Escalate all you want. The law is not on your side. And neither is this dock." The silence that followed was heavy. The tallest one scribbled something furiously on her clipboard, the pen scratching like a blade across paper. "You will regret this," she muttered before spinning on her heel. They marched away, their departure as dramatic as their arrival. But the message was clear. They were not finished. Behind me, the sun caught the polished hull of the boat, tied neatly to the dock. Its owner had left it there days earlier, without permission, without a second thought. I glanced at it, the irony not lost on me. They had accused me of violations while committing their own, and that hypocrisy would soon become their undoing. Days later, the first letter arrived. It came in an envelope stamped with bold lettering, designed to look official, designed to intimidate. Inside, the language was sharp, cold, and dripping with authority. Immediate removal of unauthorized dock required. Non-compliance will result in fines of $500 per day, beginning immediately. Further refusal will lead to legal action. I read it twice, then set on the table. My hands did not shake. My heart did not race. Instead, a slow burn of anger spread through me. They were bluffing, and they knew it. The next letter came 2 days later. The fines had doubled. The threats had grown sharper. Words like seizure and foreclosure appeared bold and underlined, designed to strike fear into anyone who dared resist. But fear was not what I felt. What I felt was resolve. Neighbors began to notice. Some avoided me, afraid of being associated with the target of the HOA's wrath. Others whispered quiet encouragement when no one was looking. "Good for you," one man said in hushed tones as he passed me on the road. "We've all wanted to push back. None of us had the courage." It struck me then just how deep the fear ran. The board had built its power not on law, but on intimidation. People complied not because they had to, but because they believed resistance was impossible. That belief was about to be shattered. By the 3rd week, the letters were arriving almost daily, each one more aggressive than the last, each one filled with threats of ruin. They did not realize that every envelope they sent was not a weapon against me, but a nail in the coffin of their own arrogance. Because while they were busy drafting their threats, I was busy researching. I dug into property records. I reviewed state regulations on dock ownership, waterway rights, and maritime law. And the deeper I looked, the clearer it became. Not only did they have no power over my dock, but their own behavior was riddled with violations. The gleaming boat tied to my dock, their pride, their symbol, was more than just arrogance. It was illegal, unregistered, improperly stored, and docked on property that did not belong to them. They had threatened me with fines. But soon, The fines would be theirs to pay. Every letter they sent, every threat they made, only tightened the noose around their own necks. And I was patient enough to let them do it. The calm waters of the lake mirrored the storm brewing beneath its surface. They thought they were dragging me toward defeat. But in truth, they were walking straight into a trap of their own making. It was a Saturday afternoon when the conflict finally broke the surface. The lake was alive with motion. Children laughing as they paddled in bright kayaks, fishermen casting lines from their john boats, neighbors gliding slowly in pontoons. It should have been a day of calm. But calm was the last thing waiting for me. As I rounded the path toward my dock, I saw them. 3 figures, the same self-appointed enforcers, standing defiantly on the wooden planks as though they owned them. Their arms were crossed, sunglasses perched on their noses, clipboards tucked like shields against their chests. And in the water beside them floated their gleaming prize. The luxury boat, polished perfection, ropes tied neatly to cleats that were mine. "Stop right there," the leader snapped when she saw me. Her voice carried across the water, loud enough for nearby kayakers to glance our way. "This dock is under investigation. Until further notice, you are not allowed to set foot on it." I paused, the absurdity of the scene striking me. They stood on my dock, blocking my way, while their illegal boat rocked gently in the water like a smug grin. Under investigation by whom? I asked calmly, though my voice carried enough to reach the neighbors drifting nearby. Because as far as the county records show, this dock belongs to me. Her lips pursed. The man beside her smirked. The association governs these waters. We have full authority here. If you continue to resist, we will escalate this matter legally. You will not win. The arrogance in his tone carried across the lake. I noticed more heads turning now. More neighbors watching from their decks and boats. The HOA had thrived on private intimidation, but this spectacle was public. I stepped closer, my eyes fixed on the ropes securing their vessel to my dock. "Strange," I said evenly, "that you're so concerned about unauthorized structures when your boat is tied up right here without permission." Her face flushed. She opened her mouth to respond, but I did not let her. "Tell me," I continued, raising my voice just enough for the gathering crowd. "Do you have paperwork proving you were allowed to dock here? Registration documents for that vessel? Proof of insurance? Or is this another case of rules for everyone else, but not for you?" The ripple of murmurs across the water was unmistakable. Neighbors leaned forward in their chairs. Kayakers paused mid-paddle. Even the fisherman nearby pulled up his line just to watch. The 3 enforcers shifted, their postures rigid but their confidence cracking. Still, the leader tried to recover. "You are dangerously close to harassment. This is your last warning." "No," I said firmly, "this is yours." The silence that followed was thick, and though they turned away with feigned superiority, I saw the truth in their eyes. For the first time, they were not certain they held control. That afternoon, as I sat on the shoreline watching them retreat, I knew the battle was no longer about threats or letters. It was about exposure, and exposure was coming. That night, I spread papers across my kitchen table until it looked more like a war room than a home. Property deeds, county surveys, copies of state regulations, all laid out, highlighted, cross-referenced. I traced every line of my deed, confirming what I already knew. The dock was mine, indisputable, protected by law. But the deeper I dug, the more I found. State law was clear. Docks attached to private property were the responsibility of the property owner alone. Associations had no jurisdiction unless specifically outlined in binding covenants. I checked mine twice. Nothing. No mention of shared rights. No language granting them power over my shoreline. The letters they had sent me were not just bluffs. They were fraud. And then came the discovery that made my pulse quicken. Buried in the state's maritime registry was a record of vessels licensed to operate on the lake. I searched for the luxury boat moored so arrogantly at my dock. Its registration number, visible in crisp paint on its side, pulled up a record instantly. Expired. 2 years expired. No valid license. No up-to-date insurance. In the eyes of the state, that vessel had no legal right to touch the water, let alone be docked on property without consent. I leaned back, a slow grin spreading across my face. The very people who had filled my mailbox with threats of illegal encroachment were themselves violating state and federal maritime law. It got worse. Scrolling further, I found notation: outstanding fees. Unpaid fines for improper docking and failure to renew registration. The sum was not small. In fact, it was enough that, under state enforcement rules, the boat could be seized upon discovery. I stared at the screen, heart pounding. The irony was almost too perfect. They had spent weeks painting me as a violator, an outlaw on my own property. Yet their pride and joy, the vessel they flaunted like a crown jewel, was itself contraband. The trap had sprung without me lifting a finger. All I needed to do was shine a light on the truth. The next morning, I placed a call to the county sheriff's office. Calm, polite, precise. I explained the situation, provided the registration details, forwarded copies of the expired license records and unpaid fines. The officer on the other end listened carefully. If what you're saying checks out, that vessel is in violation. We'll send someone to investigate. Please do, I said, my voice steady, though inside my chest thundered with anticipation. For weeks, they had waged war on me with paper and arrogance. Now, the law itself was about to arrive at my dock, and when it did, the outcome would be undeniable, unforgettable, and final. The showdown came on a blistering afternoon, the kind of day when the lake shimmered like liquid glass and the air felt thick with heat. I had just stepped out onto my deck when I saw them marching down the path, clipboards in hand, faces carved from stone, anger radiating off them like steam. Behind them, whispers rose from neighboring porches. People leaned over railings, shaded their eyes, and waited. By now, the entire community knew of the battle. Some rooted for me in silence. Others watched nervously, unwilling to defy the board openly. But today, there would be no silence. They stepped onto my dock as though it were their stage. The leader's voice cracked across the water. This has gone on long enough. You are in direct violation of HOA regulations. You will dismantle this dock immediately or face consequences you cannot imagine. The words carried with the force of practiced intimidation, but I noticed a flicker of unease in her eyes. She was used to frighten compliance. Instead, I stood calm, my hands folded behind my back, waiting. Do you have anything to say for yourself? The man beside her demanded. His voice rose sharply, drawing the attention of boaters drifting nearby. Paddles stilled, engines idled. The lake itself seemed to lean in to listen. I let the silence hang for a beat before I spoke. Yes, I said evenly. This dock is mine. It is protected under the deed of this property and under state law. Every letter you've sent, every threat you've made, has been empty. Gasps rippled from the shoreline. The crowd was growing now. Neighbors stepping onto porches, kayakers gliding closer, a fisherman anchoring his boat to watch. The leader's face flushed crimson. She jabbed a finger toward the polished vessel tied to my dock. That boat has more right to be here than you do, she snapped. I smiled faintly, my eyes never leaving hers. That boat, I said, my voice sharp enough to cut to the murmurs, is an unregistered vessel with expired paperwork and unpaid fines. It has no legal right to touch this water, let alone occupy my dock. The reaction was immediate. Neighbors gasped. A few muttered in disbelief. One man laughed outright, the sound ringing across the water. Her composure cracked. That is slander, she shouted, but her voice wavered. No, I said firmly, that is fact. The air vibrated with tension, the crowd thick with curiosity and anticipation. And then, as if summoned by fate itself, the sound came, the low growl of an approaching engine. A county sheriff's boat rounded the bend, its lights flashing against a glittering lake. The timing could not have been more perfect. The sheriff's boat cut through the water with authority, slowing only as it neared my dock. 2 officers stood at the bow, their uniforms crisp, their expressions unreadable. The entire lake seemed to hold its breath. The leader of the HOA straightened, relief flickering across her face. She stepped forward, arms outstretched as though welcoming allies. "Officers," she called. "Thank goodness." This man is in violation of community regulations. He refuses to comply with lawful orders. Ma'am, one of the officers interrupted, his tone cool and professional. We're not here about him. The word struck like thunder. A ripple of shock moved through the crowd. The officer turned toward me. Sir, you contacted our office regarding a vessel illegally docked on your property? Yes, I said calmly, my voice carrying for all to hear. The boat tied here belongs to one of these individuals. Its registration is expired. Fines unpaid. I provided documentation to your office. The officer nodded. We verified. This vessel is operating illegally. Effective immediately, it is subject to seizure. Gasps exploded from the crowd. Whispers turned into outright chatter. All eyes darted to the gleaming boat, once a symbol of their authority, now a liability exposed under the harsh light of law. The HOA leader's face drained of color. That is impossible, she sputtered. There must be a mistake. That vessel is expired by 2 years. The officer cut in sharply, and carrying outstanding fines. This is not a mistake, ma'am. The second officer moved efficiently, securing the ropes, preparing to tow the boat away. The sight was surreal. The vessel that had been their throne was now being stripped from them piece by piece. Neighbors erupted into murmurs, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others grinning openly. For years, these enforcers had ruled with arrogance. Now, their power was unraveling before everyone's eyes. You cannot do this, the man shouted, his voice breaking with desperation. We are the board. We have authority. You have no authority here, the officer said firmly, his tone final. Not on this property. Not on this dock. And certainly not on this water. The word struck like a gavel. The crowd cheered, not loudly, but enough to carry. A few clapped. Others whispered to one another with glee. The spell of fear had been broken. I watched in silence as the officers completed their work. Ropes untied, lines fastened, the once proud boat now tethered not to my dock, but to the sheriff's vessel. Slowly, methodically, they towed it away, the gleaming hull shrinking as it disappeared around the bend. The HOA leaders stood frozen, powerless, their clipboards hanging limply at their sides. For the first time, they had nothing to say. And in that silence, the truth became undeniable. Their reign of intimidation was over. I turned to the gathering of neighbors, raising my voice just enough to carry. This dock is mine. The law is clear. And today proves that no amount of threats or arrogance can change that. Applause rippled across the water. Real applause this time, unafraid, unrestrained. Neighbors who once kept their distance now smiled openly, nodding in approval. The lake had shifted. The fear was gone. The HOA leaders retreated in silence, their pride shredded, their authority dismantled. And I remained on my dock, not as their victim, but as a man who had turned their own arrogance into their downfall. The lake had always carried whispers, but after that day the whispers changed. For years, people had spoken quietly, fearful of being overheard by the board. Conversations on porches had been hushed, complaints shared only behind closed doors. But once the sheriff's boat disappeared around a bend, towing away the vessel that symbolized the HOA's arrogance, a new current swept through community. Neighbors who had once avoided my gaze now sought me out. On evening walks, people waved openly. One older man, his weathered hands gripping a cane, stopped me by the road. We've been waiting for someone to stand up to them, he said. You didn't just protect your dock. You gave us all a reason to breathe again. The next day, a family paddled past in a canoe, smiling broadly as they waved. That was incredible, the father called out. About time someone held him accountable. His children giggled, splashing their paddles in rhythm, their laughter carrying across the water like music. Even those who had been silent witnesses came forward. A woman who lived 2 houses down confessed that she had been fined hundreds of dollars for planting flowers not approved by the board. Another man admitted he had been threatened with foreclosure over a tool shed the board deemed unsightly. Their stories poured out like floodwaters now that the dam of fear had cracked. Meanwhile, the HOA leaders retreated into silence. Their boat, their pride, their symbol of status, was gone. Their threats, once sharp and intimidating, now sounded hollow. They stopped appearing at my dock, stopped sending letters, stopped trying to enforce rules they never had the power to impose. The irony was rich. For all their posturing, for all their threats, it had taken nothing more than the truth to dismantle their authority. The law they claimed to wield had turned against them. Weeks passed, and life on the lake changed. People lingered longer at the shoreline, chatting freely without glancing over their shoulders. Boats drifted by with music playing, laughter echoing. The community felt lighter, freer, as though a shadow had been lifted. And through it all, my dock remained exactly where it had always been. Steady, quiet, untouched. Not a single nail moved, not a single board threatened. Every time I walked its length and sat at the edge, I felt the weight of what had happened. Not just a victory for me, but a victory for everyone who had ever been silenced by fear of authority that never truly existed. The lake no longer belonged to the board. It belonged to all of us again. It would have been easy in the days after the showdown to gloat, to parade the victory, to rub salt in wounds. But I did not. I did not need to. The victory spoke for itself. Instead, I returned to what had drawn me to the lake in the first place: peace. I fished in the mornings, the water calm beneath me. I kayaked at dusk, the sky painted in colors too vivid for words. I sat on the dock at night, watching the stars ripple across the surface like diamonds scattered by hand. And as I sat there, I thought about what had happened. The truth was simple. Bullies thrive on silence. They build their power not on law or fairness, but on fear. They count on people being too weary or too intimidated to fight back. And most of the time, it works. Most of the time, people fold. But the moment someone refuses to bend, the moment someone stands firmly in the truth, the illusion shatters. That is what happened on my dock. They had all the appearance of power, but none of the foundation. And when exposed, they crumbled. The moral is not about boats or docks or property lines. It is about courage, about knowing your rights, holding your ground, and refusing to let arrogance strip away what is yours. Because when you stand firm, when you shine a light on the truth, even the loudest threats lose their power. Now, whenever I hear the water lapping against the wood, whenever I see neighbors smiling freely as they drip by, I am reminded of that lesson. The dock is more than just planks and nails. It is a symbol, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming pressure, the truth has a way of rising steady and undeniable, like the sun over the lake. And so I live quietly again, at peace with the water, with the land, with the life I chose. But I know this. If anyone ever tries to take what is mine again, they will find that the dock does not just belong to me. It belongs to the truth. And the truth, once revealed, cannot be seized.